Okay, thanks a lot. Really grateful to be here and super happy. It's been a trip that's been postponed, I guess, 1 or maybe 2 times. So now, years later, I get to be here. I'm very happy. So thanks Federica, thanks Georg, thanks everyone for being here. What I want to do today is, well, one way to sell it is to say that I want to share my epistemic angst about some key discussions on expertise and epistemic authority. And I thought, I was planning on having something different, but then I thought, okay, well, there's no better place where to throw this in and see what happens. And I ended up having this talk that puts together a few of the things that I've been working on a bit in the past and some new things. Okay, so let me get started with the basics and see where my problem lies. So the basics is, I guess we could all agree that there is, several questions in the debate about cognitive expertise. 2 of them, I would say 2 main questions about this topic is what it takes to be a cognitive expert. And there we have issues of at least 2 sorts. We have questions about methodology, whether we get to have an account of expertise by going straight to what kind of properties experts are supposed to have in terms of epistemic properties, in terms of dispositions, in terms of know-how or whatever, or maybe a functionalist approach. Let's see first what kind of service the experts fulfill in a community, and then figure later, only later, what kind of properties experts are supposed to have to fulfill those functions. And then we also have reputational accounts. Well, I won't talk much about this. Kind of the idea that the social reputation that some people have in the community is what will make a difference as to whether or not they are experts. Then we also have issues with the kind of epistemic basis of an expert competence, quite irrespective of how you go about the methodological issue. Well, there are people that say, well, experts are those who have more true beliefs than others, those who have better evidence, those who have better understanding, those who have better knowledge, and so on and so forth. And this is, I guess, to be 2 main dimensions of the general question, what it is a cognitive expert. Then we also have a related question. Well, once we found out what kind of people they are, then how should lay people relate to them? So how should they respond to expert testimony? And here we have at least 2 models, the idea that experts come along as authorities, so the kind of preemptionist model, and the expert as advisor or total evidence view, or let's don't get too much in the details, but at least 2 different ways of responding to this. And I take it to be a shared, at least a widely shared intuition in the debate that if there is anyone that we should trust or defer to, well, this is expert. And I hope that shouldn't get too much trouble by throwing this out. Now, here is my problem. My problem is that I want, ideally, I would love to provide a framework that makes, that accounts for two conflicting intuitions that I have, conflicting in the sense that they don't seem to go well to each other, and especially they seem to have a problem with the shared intuition I just mentioned. One is that experts are those who know more, no matter how we cash that out. And second, that experts are not necessarily or not always those whom we should defer to. And I'll get to talk more about this in a second. So basically, I want to try to see if there is a way to make sense of these 2 intuitions that I have that apparently clash with the first intuition that I take to be very common. So what I will do, ideally, like a perfect talk would have a nice argument throughout the intuitions, and then get to show you why the widely shared intuition is wrong and why my 2 conflicting intuitions are not conflicting. I don't quite have that. What I have is an attempt to offer, kind of a route to a functionalist account of expertise, well, not a random functionalist account, one that allows me to make the distinction between experts and authorities, if you want. And I want to talk about this functionalist account in light of a problem that I take to be I mean, maybe it's not new, there's probably nothing new, but still it's getting urgent, and it's the public exposure of experts, and if you want, scientists in particular. And to do so, to defend this functionalist view, I'll go through some objections that Thomas Grundlam has raised, and I'll try to defend these objections. Well, I'll try to defend the view from these objections, and we'll see how badly I end up at the end. Okay, so here's the plan. I'll say a little bit about public exposures of cognitive experts first. Then I'll set up the functionalist account, the functionalist framework, which I take from Craig's style or John Greco's interpretation of Craig's style epistemology. And based on a key distinction that John Greco lays out, I'll try to apply this distinction between producing knowledge or gathering knowledge and distributing knowledge. I'll try to apply that distinction to the case of experts, and then I'll see what kind of implications the account has. I hope that I tried to manage to make it clear something that was not very clear before, but in my mind at least. Okay, let's get started. Public exposure, new phenomenon, not so sure how new it is, but definitely there's an upsurge of publicly exposed experts. We've seen this with the pandemic, we've seen this with the Ukraine war, and I mean, the examples could be many more. And there's even recent definitions of what, in this case, it's applied to a public physician, what kind of figure these public physicians should be. In a recent paper, Toff and Williams have proposed the definition, the idea that public physician is someone who sees the public presence as part of their work, who's outward facing, and who recognizes that the benefits of public engagement outweigh the risks. So I kind of think of public scientists as scientists on a mission, like very clear and social goals, spread the good news to the wide public. They take care not just of their outreach, but kind of the quality of engagement with their followers. They go into details of how they handle social networks. I mean, it's quite another story, I'd say, but just to give you a sense of how detailed the kind of view of these public exposure can get. And they are obviously experts that take responsibility for the risks that they run by engaging with the wide public, and they are epistemically conscientious. At least this is kind of the ideal story that they will tell. Okay, now I want to say that we should all be on board with the idea there's some clear benefits of public exposure of cognitive experts. Last night, while I was preparing the slides, I thought that the TED kind talk expertise could be a good example, maybe. The idea that these experts kind of go straight away to the public, engage with the public in a super accessible way, or at least as accessible as possible. And this brings home some good things. We see experts at work engaging with lay people. Lay people receive first-hand testimony from the most updated people on the market, and they get advice from leading figures. And I guess there's more benefits that I could even mention here, but that should be quite a good story about why public exposure should be a good thing. I think there are at least heavy risks at the same time. One that might be a problem that we have to face and don't get stopped by is the idea that if there's more public exposure of experts, then it will be there. I mean, the amount of disagreement among experts might still remain the same, but what will become evident is that to the lay people is that there is this disagreement, right? And it's kind of hard to handle by the media and by the public, the idea that these experts disagree with each other, right? Maybe there's not much we can do about that, but there are other problems that I guess we should deal with more seriously. One is that if the experts are publicly exposed, then the risks of epistemic trespassing, an episode of epistemic trespassing, becomes an everyday matter. And there's journalists interviewing experts and asking questions. Let's say an expert in epidemiology is asked a question about the COVID pandemic, like a very specific question, and then how about the political issues related to this COVID pandemic? And once the experts are there, often they answer these questions quite easily. And what happens then is that we have experts in epidemiology put to be in contrast with politicians or things like that. And even setting aside epistemic trespassing, which I will take a long route to get into, there are also other side effects of public exposure, and I want to mention two of them, with two sadly so local cases for me, which is Italian-based cases. The idea here is a case quite a couple years ago, maybe less than a couple years ago, 1 year ago. Matteo Bassetti, sadly from my hometown university. He's director of the disease clinic. He's quite, I'd say an expert. I wouldn't dispute the fact that he's an expert in the field. He basically claimed on TV news that we subverted the order of things. I'm translating from the Italian words, but I'm not cheating on the words, actually. So he said, we let a veterinarian speak about vaccines. So he was basically saying, well, we're letting people do the trespassing so easily. In fact, what he was doing, he was personally attacking these other scientists, Ilaria Capua, who is by degree a veterinarian, but is now director of the One Health Center of Excellence at the University of Florida. She specializes in shared disease between animal and human beings. Basically, the core thing is that she was speaking about things that she knows very well, that are within her field of expertise. And she's not just a good scientist, she is probably one of the best science communicators we got in Italy with the COVID pandemic thing. So, this scientist, Matteo Bassetti, was obviously widely criticized for this kind of discredit he was doing against these reputable scientists and science communicators. And this is one case. Here is another, which is potentially more serious. So the man in the picture is Andrea Crisanti. He's a professor of microbiology at the University of Padua, former professor of molecular parasitology at the Imperial College London. And in November 2020, he was claiming again on TV news the following. He said, it normally takes 5 to 8 years to produce a vaccine. Thus, without available data, I will not take the first vaccine available in January. I'd want to make sure that this vaccine has been properly tested and that it fulfills all the safety and efficacy criteria. Okay, so what happened after this is that, you know what? We got back a giant scientist from the UK in Italy, and this scientist is basically saying that what the other Italian scientists are saying is just completely wrong. So should we follow this genius coming back from the UK, or should we follow the other scientists? And that's kind of a huge case of disagreement. As it turned out, Crisanti is not a fool, obviously. He realized that he was making a huge mistake, and he had himself, shot in the photograph sense, and also in the vaccine sense, while he was taking the COVID vaccine, right? So again, he was widely criticized for the kind of reckless assertion. The impact on the general audience was quite big, and it took a while to restore the idea, because after one of the leading figures said something like this, what happened is that other leading figures, or maybe slightly less leading figures, started to jump on the situation to say, you know what, we're letting these people speak too much and things like that, okay? The result was huge confusion in the media and the general public, an increase of distrust in expertise, because some people started to say, you know what, here is the situation. We're not even the scientists have clear ideas of what we should do. So why don't we, I stick to my guns. I don't trust them. I'll go along with the, herbal, things that I'm taking against the COVID and so on and so forth. And as I was saying, basically this led some sort of indirect support for anti-scientific campaigns. Now, that said, I tried to lay out the kind of problems with the public exposure of cognitive experts. Now I want to make some assumptions about these cases, just to be very clear. Hopefully, first assumption, hopefully, it's not just an Italian problem. If it is, then so bad for us, and my talk will lose any serious relevance. Second, These cases involve competent scientists that were working in their fields. Third, these scientists were acting in good faith. I don't want to consider a scientist acting in bad faith because that's to completely, I mean, the merchants of doubt story, it's a completely different one. And fourth, and most importantly, it looks as though these resulting harms follow from a basic fact. We take experts to be those whom we should trust in a domain, and that's why we give them that much of an exposure, and that's why it becomes a problem when they disagree with each other, and that's why it's a problem when they throw out opinions that are unfounded or so, and so on and so forth. So this might be just a list of episodes of vicious public scientists. I don't really think so, but that could be an option. Anyway, what I'm interested in is the kind of epistemic dimension of the phenomenon, of the problem. And the hypothesis is that I want to put forth is that these kind of mistakes that the cognitive experts are making have importantly to do, maybe not only to do, but importantly to do, with the fact that they might be incompetent in communication, maybe in science communication in this case. And so, to frame it in a different way, cognitive experts don't necessarily, or by default, make good communicators. Now, what would I want to do with this? Try to offer an account of cognitive expertise that can help us reduce the risks of granting epistemic authorities in cases in which we shouldn't, no matter whether the authoritative testifier is an expert in their field. Craig says famously in the Knowledge and State of Nature book, any community may be presumed to have an interest in evaluating sources of information. In connection with that interest, certain concepts will be in use. The hypothesis I wish to try out is that the concept of knowledge is one of them. And to put it briefly and roughly, the concept of knowledge is used to flag approved sources of information. So, according to Craig, the core idea is that the concept of knowledge governs two main activities. One is the production of actionable information for a community, and the other one is the flow of actionable information within a community. And John Greco has built upon this idea and came up with this account of these activities of a community that he calls knowledge gathering or knowledge production and knowledge distribution. So the function, when we talk about knowledge gathering, what do we have in mind? We have in mind things like detectives asking questions around or interviewing potential suspects and getting the true story about some crime that happened, or scientific discovery at the same time. These kind of things are kind of paradigmatic examples of knowledge production. The function that governs knowledge production is the gatekeeping function. So basically, people who do this kind of job are the gatekeepers, and they need to make sure that only accurate information gets in the community. So the norms that they have to follow are norms of quality control. Let's make sure that too loose information don't get into the community. Once the information is within the community, we get to have knowledge distribution. And knowledge distribution is basically passing the information along to as many people in the community as they need. This can get up to school education, where you get to, give available information to the kids through some sort of a chain of passing the bucket of the epistemic, resources we have, or the news. The news are quite an obvious example of knowledge distribution on Greco's framework too. Oh, here is a note that I need to make. Well, Greco is not talking at all about expertise here. Greco talks about the function of testimony in this Craig-style account, let's say, and he's interested in disentangling the relationship between reductionism and anti-reductionism in the epistemology of testimony. Again, I want to make no speculation about what he would say about the expert's role. I want to try to make a speculation about what I would say about the expert role. So the conjecture I want to put forth is that exposing experts to the public debate and distrusting them in light of the problems that I've mentioned before with public exposure presuppose an account according to which the expert competence involves both knowledge gathering or producing and knowledge distributing. That seems quite plausible. That's the reason why we expect this kind of service from experts because we think as a basic assumption of their role that they do both things at the same time. What's the problem with this? What's the problem with this assumption? Why is it problematic to think that experts as a fundamental concept have this twofold function to fulfill? Well, because these two main activities are governed by very different epistemic requirements. So they involve very different kinds of abilities that these people should be able to apply, to deploy. So knowledge gathering possibly involve access and evidence to and evidence about the primary questions of a domain. So what kind of problems the domain has, what kind of answers we should come up with to make the domain make a little step further. And the related skills that these involve are the gatekeeping related skills. So basically, we should make sure that these people are able to carry out inquiry in the domain, that are able to address excellent questions in the domain, that are able to spot when the evidence supporting some sort of piece of information is not good, so the information shouldn't be let in the community, that are able to engage with counter evidence, they find new questions to answer, and the list could be even tweaked in a different way if you want. It's easy to see that knowledge distribution involves a completely different set of skills and tasks. So basically, knowledge distributing, I'd say, has to do, at least primarily, with evidence about secondary questions within a domain. So distributing knowledge does not necessarily require that people have the ability to answer the first, the primary questions within the domain, but rather that they have access to the evidence that has to do with these questions in the domain, and that they deploy different skills. Skills like being able to acknowledge the kind of interlocutors they are talking to, and if they are talking to someone who can understand, like the scientific vocabulary and things like that, then they could tailor their answer to the level of comprehension that the interlocutor has. And this tailoring involves, tailoring the communication to the needs of the audience, but at the same time, and in some cases, this might even come down to not mentioning some things that might distract the attention of the interlocutor. And in other cases, at the same time, tailoring the communication to the resources of the audience, it won't help throw some like technical vocabulary to people who would not be able to understand. This is what we can get from quite a quick, let's say, jump into the Greco's framework for accounting for the epistemic activities in a community, and the kind of, well, let's say, dispositions or abilities or activity, the requirements that one has to fulfill to play the role of a knowledge distributor or of the knowledge producer on this model. Now, what I want to ask is, well, what kind of place expert can have? And so the easiest way to approach this is to say, well, expert can be knowledge distributors, or maybe expert can be both knowledge distributors and producers at the same time, or only knowledge producers. So let's see. On the account of an expert as a knowledge distributor, it turns out that the function of experts is disseminating the available knowledge amongst the community members. And I want to say, I hope you are with me on this, that this is too weak a model. And this is too weak a model because, well, first of all, if experts are those who distribute knowledge, who's gonna bring the knowledge in the community? Who's the gatekeeper in the first place, right? But setting this aside, the problem might also be that in some cases there can be amateurs that are sufficiently skilled in knowledge distributing. There's people who are very good at distributing information. They might not have any problem-solving skills, and I think we should try to resist the idea that these people can be counted as experts in a domain. And as a matter of fact, if I can try to push a little bit more into this direction, the intuition, well, we never ask amateurs to contribute to policy making. We don't invite amateurs to, tables where scientists are called to, scientists or experts are called to, to discuss with, politicians or people involved in policy making. I think we have good reasons for doing that. We don't think that they are experts in the domain. Okay, so first option's gone, hopefully. I'm making things easy, but let's suppose that it's gone. The second option is that experts should be knowledge producers and distributors at the same time, right? So on this account, the function of experts is twofold. They have to produce new knowledge for the benefit of the community and also be the ones who disseminate the available knowledge among the community members. And this account definitely doesn't incur any problem with amateurs because it has a strong knowledge producing component, let's put it this way. But I worry that this is too strong a model. And I worry that this is too strong a model because I think that bad communicators cannot be expert no matter their competence in a domain. If we go back to the initial scientist case, those scientists were bad communicators, we might want to say that, but they were legitimate experts in their field, and I would think that it would be too huge a cost to say that they are not experts because they are not good enough in knowledge distribution. So this is why I think that a better hope lies in with the expert as knowledge producers view. And according to this view, the idea is that what we should ask of experts is that they help gatekeep at the front door the information that we let in the community. And the advantage of this idea, obviously, is that it doesn't incur the problem with amateurs. At the same time, it doesn't incur the problem with bad communicators because, it makes room for the idea that someone can fail in bad communication but be a good gatekeeper at the front door. But it does incur problems that Thomas has raised and maybe other too. So I'll try to address two problems. The first is that knowledge production is unnecessary for one to be an expert, and the second is that knowledge production is insufficient. So unless I come up with a good response, I'm pretty much done because the kind of objections go in both directions. So according to Thomas, the knowledge production view it has a problem because there are experts who may specialize in non-scientific domains, for instance. And my view would go into, would incur a problem. How can I account for that? For instance, Thomas offers the idea of experts in the origin and quality of wine. There maybe that's no scientific domain. What kind of knowledge production is that? Okay, so I think that the functional definition requires that the expert has the ability to acquire or produce new knowledge in domains, so there's some sort of a dispositional component. And I want to say, at least that's the route I thought I could take, that one is an expert about the origin and quality of wine to the extent that one can introduce new relevant information in the community if and when, for instance, a new type of grapes is created or something like that. So if someone is completely unable to do any of that, I would be happy to say that they are not an expert. They know a bunch of stuff about the origin and the quality of wine, but I wouldn't call them an expert. I think we would want to invite in the panel of experts on origin quality of wine for policy making, if there is any, I have no idea, those who are able to account for the new grapes or the new kind of wines. I don't even know how to say that in proper English. And the second problem that has to do with knowledge production as a non-necessary requirement of expertise is that there are cases in which experts lose the ability to contribute to knowledge production due to some cognitive impairment. And if I recall Thomas' example correctly, the cognitive impairment is such that the person loses the ability to write and read, but doesn't lose any ability to manage the kind of beliefs they have stored in their mind and the kind of reasoning capacities. So here I have to bite the bullet, and I think I can do that. So I think that in a case like this, the attribution of expertise becomes pretty much an honorific title. So what we would say is that, in fact, they cease to be experts as there's no epistemic function they can fulfill anymore in the community. We would say possibly, well, they were experts until they were able to do their job. Now, due to some unfortunate circumstances, they are not anymore. And this wouldn't count, at least I think, as saying, I mean, they are not, good people anymore. They are not decent human beings anymore. Nothing like that. It's just saying, well, there is an epistemic function that there's a reason why we call them experts, and there is a reason why we say they can't be expert anymore, because there's not much they can do for us anymore. Now, there's also problems with sufficiency. So why should I think that knowledge producing is enough for one to be an expert? Thomas says, well, think about mathematicians who contribute to producing knowledge in the disciplines of biology, psychology, and economics, despite not being experts in these disciplines. So am I committed to say that they strangely are experts in disciplines that they don't know too much about? And I think I could say that arguably, well, they would not be able to give these contributions to these other fields unless they could contribute to knowledge production in mathematics, at least. Or at least, if that is not a route that I can take, I would say, well, they are experts in what? In specific field, maybe in mathematical psychology, mathematical economics. I had to check that these fields were really there, and they are there, so I think I can say that. And this would, I think, account for the worry that, Thomas has on the sufficiency of knowledge producing for one to count as an expert. Now, I think that, well, ideally, if these replies hit their target, I will have some minor cost, but I could say that this view of the cognitive expert avoids the problem affecting the alternative functionalist accounts, addresses the objections, and can also suggest a solution to the issue with the public exposure of experts. That now one might think, why did you talk about the public exposure and we got lost? Well, I think that we can make 2 points about the case of public exposure. That those examples didn't affect the attribution of expertise, so hopefully you don't want to say that those experts are not experts because they were bad communicators. And if you are on board with that, this account can bring home that point, because experts can be bad communicators. They have skills in one activity, not in the other. And it might make it easy to see the problem with the initial widespread intuition, and that's what I would have to say more a bit about. The widespread intuition was that if there's anyone that we should trust and defer to, this is experts. And here, the worry would become something like that the epistemic deference should not just require that the authoritative testifier is an expert, but possibly something else or something more. So the view that I proposed obviously can go as radical as to say that there are cases in which one is an expert while being almost unable to contribute to the progress of any discipline. So take the ivory tower case, the one who just engages with very, very little literature in a very narrow field. They don't engage with anyone else, just publish papers or whatever. This is a super scientifically oriented idea. But this is the radical, the view can go. But in many cases, in most cases possibly, it feels as though experts contribute to some extent to distributing knowledge. And typically this happens at least within some sort of sub-communities they belong to. This is something that Greco makes room for. Think about lab members, expert colleagues, what we are doing right now, graduate students that engage with the course of the professor, and so on and so forth. So as long as knowledge production is not just a purely solipsistic enterprise, experts have to engage in some sort of knowledge distributing. So how am I able to, to distinguish these kind of, to make sense of this kind of obvious point? And the way I want to go is to say that it's one thing to distribute information within the closest circles, and another thing to jump from that circle to the wide public. And so the idea is rather that, more specifically, is that if we are able, within Greco's framework, to make sense of different small communities that we are part of, communities involving like I know, the department members or the people working on epistemic authority or the University of Genoa or the people living in Italy and so on and so forth. What experts are supposed to be is entrance gates for information to be shared in their groups. And this can be even, entrance gates of the first little community they are part of. In the Ivory Tower case, there would be like a very tiny subgroup. In more reasonable cases, a slightly larger group. Whether experts also serve as exit gates of the small community, well, that's a different story. And whether information can be shared with wider networks depends on some level of knowledge distributing skills or disposition, or call it as you want. And this is something that, if you think of, expert communicators, teachers, a wide range of other figures fulfill maybe much better than experts themselves do. So, in a sense, if I'm not in the super radical case, I'll have to say that some little level of knowledge distribution is obviously required of experts to the extent that they have to interact with someone. But it is one thing to share information within the little circle where you speak the same language, you have the same kind of vocabulary, the same kind of technical abilities. And another thing to be able to be the exit gate, namely to be able to pass that information to people of other groups that might not have the same skills, the same abilities, and so on and so forth. I hope that's at least vaguely clear. So if what I've tried to say makes sense, then I think that we should trust experts to produce or gather knowledge in a domain, but not always and necessarily trust experts when it comes to distributing knowledge across the community. And this means that for any view of epistemic authority to be plausible, and I worry, especially for the preemptionist one, it's not enough that the authoritative testifier be an expert. So go functionalist or objectivist, the obvious, list of epistemic states that one expert has to be wouldn't be enough to count as an epistemic authority. So I think that it's also necessary that the authoritative testifier has and deploy the relevant distributing skill. It could go obviously on a degree by degree basis. That depending on how many subgroups the expert is an exit gate to, this would obviously change. But at least this is the kind of direction I want to push to bring home the idea that expertise and epistemic authority can come apart in some sense. That expert can be people that do some sort of things, producing knowledge, bringing knowledge, serving as entrance gates, and epistemic authorities can be the ones who distribute knowledge and serve as exit gates from one subgroup to the other. And here I'm done, and thanks for your attention.